wealth, industriousness, all these different things are a sign of righteousness. And I feel like even as we read through the Book of Mormon, there is this explicit mention that when the Nephites are righteous, they prosper. Sure. And it's very explicit in this prosperity where they build buildings and they have commerce and they're developing agriculture. And then you juxtapose that with wicked societies, i.e. the Lamanites, who are idle and loathsome and don't even manufacture clothing. They run around in loincloths. And so the gospel of wealth, I feel like, at least our cultural interpretation of it, even in the scriptures, is prosperity and wealth equals righteousness. And poverty and sort of degradation equals wickedness. And I feel like, of course, our New England progenitors in the gospel, Brigham Young and the Pratts and Joseph, all these are in New England where the Industrial Revolution is really getting traction. They're very naturally bringing these cultural elements into the early culture of the church. And we regard these men so highly, as we should. Sure. But we regard them so highly that we assume when they say, like, the industrious, that's what God wants, that they're making an eternal statement rather than a culturally embedded statement.
Jesus learned to live righteously.
It is time for another episode of The Cultural Hall. I'm excited about this one because we always talk about the email address, contact@theculturalhall.com, as a way that you can tell us about episodes that you've loved or maybe suggest an episode. And a little while back, got an email from one Mike Hawkins, who said, you know what, I'd be a great guest. And I said, tell me what we're talking about. And he says, Infinite Contingencies, an innovative and critical look at Latter-day Saint doctrine and practice. And I said, I'm not sure I understand all of that, but I know that within our time together, we'll be able to understand it. So here he is, Michael Hawkins. Welcome into the Cultural Hall.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Really looking forward to this.
I have to ask you, you are a doctor of what? A PhD in what?
So I got my PhD in 2009 in history.
Okay.
I do Asian history in particular. So I specialized in Southeast Asia, colonialism, Islam, modern China, and the Philippines.
Okay. Is that an intersection with what we're going to be talking about today? Or that's just something, I mean, nothing is ever wholly different, but is this highly influenced by those traditions or no?
Not too much. I mean, I bring to bear a lot of the critical thinking that I had for 15 years in academia, and bring in some experiences that I've had in Southeast Asia that I thought were particularly interesting, and some theoretical orientations that I adopted in a lot of my other academic books. But for the most part, I wanted to kind of keep this strictly theology with a little bit of philosophy, and I sprinkle in a little bit of history, I guess, here and there in one or two chapters. But for the most part, I wanted to do something kind of completely different than what I've done in the past.
Take me back to yesteryear when a young teenage Mike Hawkins is like, you know what I want to do? Get a PhD in history about Southeast Asia history. And it's like, how did you get from that young boy to today? What was it that made you decide, hey, this is the thing, this is the jam?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of an unlikely candidate. So I grew up in Western Idaho on a cattle ranch. And what was funny about it is in the 90s, cattle prices were like nil, right? Everybody's starving to death. And my dad was kind of telling my brother and I, especially, like, maybe go get an education, right? Maybe don't do this for a living, get an indoor job. And I think much to his surprise, we did. So my brother's an endodontist. He's in the Tri-Cities area. And then I went off and got a PhD. And what basically happened is left the ranch, went to Rick's College for a year or for a semester, and then got a mission call to the Philippines.
Okay.
And it was the last place in the world I ever expected to get called. I don't know why. It was as likely as any other, but
sure.
Had to look it up on a map. I was called to Baguio Mission, had to look that up on a map. Got there and wholeheartedly, absolutely, hopelessly fell in love with everything about it. Love the place, love the people, love the culture, love the food. And I was so hopelessly in love with it that I actually couldn't envision a day when I was not a missionary there. I will say maybe one of the hardest times of my life is I came home and I was just like, okay, what's the point? I was really filled with like some existential angst where I felt like, what am I going to do now for the next 80 years? Like work for a living? That sounds terrible. So went to BYU, got a degree in history, got married, had some kids. And then after BYU, I was kind of at a loss on what to do. And even my history degree. So I listened to everybody at the beginning and they said, look, do something useful. So I was pre-med. I was, what all was I? Communications, PR. I can't remember. And then on the side, I was taking history classes
Mm-hmm.
and really just loved it. Not even trying to do well in the class. I just loved it. It's all I wanted to do. And I happened to get an article published as an undergrad. And I had a really wonderful professor. Shout out to Dr. Choate. He kind of came up to me and he's like, "Hey, dummy, like you seem to have a knack for this. You speak exotic languages. You seem to have a knack for writing. Study history." And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, "All right." So got a degree in history. Ended up getting a master's degree, and then applied to a PhD program and got in. And when I was doing my PhD, I really felt like, oh, this is where I need to bring to bear everything that I experienced in Southeast Asia. Like all the things that I saw over there and experienced are starting to make sense. And so after the first 2 years of my PhD program, I was a Fulbright scholar. So I took my family back to the Philippines where we
Wow.
lived for a year. Yeah. And it was a little bit odd. I don't know how I got approved. Don't ask me, but I got my Fulbright approved for study in what is a kind of conflict zone. So in the southern Philippines, in a place called the Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, it's almost kind of like what we would call here in the U.S. An Indian reservation or a
Okay.
native reservation for Muslims. And I did most of my research inside the arm, which I look back now and I'm like, what kind of dad was I? Like bringing my kids into this violent area, and but they all got along just fine. So my wife is originally from Mindanao. She's from
Okay.
the Philippines. So they all look like they fit in. I was the one that was probably the odd one out. So did a lot of really interesting research there, came back, wrote my dissertation, and then was a visiting professor in Michigan and eventually got a tenure track position at Creighton University in Omaha, and published my dissertation as a book in 2013 entitled Making Moros. And it was kind of a look at the American military occupation of the Philippines from 1898 to 1914. Also published a couple of books on language and culture, published a couple dozen articles on various academic topics, and then published another book. It came out at the worst time a book could come out. So my second book dropped in March of 2020.
Yeah, yeah. I knew as soon as you said the worst time a book could drop, I already knew when it was. But yeah, I mean, on the one hand, we had nothing but time, but you had no way of telling people, hey, there's this great thing that's available. Oh, you have to purchase it. Never mind. You're not going out of your house to go get it.
Yeah, that was
Yep.
exactly it. So all the speaking engagements, all the everything just absolutely quit on me. And it was a book about the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904, where they had a kind of human zoo at the Louisiana Purchase Exposition. So I wrote about the Filipino Muslim village at that exposition. And then around after 15 years, kind of had an opportunity for a little bit of a life change, got out of academia. I work for a startup that does comprehensive law enforcement training now. So bringing some of the cultural aspects and community engagement into a more practical setting, I guess. But I was like, hey, now that I'm not an academic, I'll write whatever I want. So I got
Yeah.
really excited and wrote this book, working on a second one right now. But I thought, oh, I all my life kind of wanted to write books on Latter-day Saint theology, ethics, culture, these kinds of things. So it was fun. Yeah.
And I want to get deeper into it. You left plenty of nuggets along the way that I want to just pick up the pieces of from your life. Your wife from the Philippines, did you meet her while you were serving your mission, or did you lock your heart, elder? We always got that part when I was serving a mission. Lock your heart. Well.
Yes, and kind of no, answering both those questions in succession. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So met her over there. She was also a missionary. We actually met harvesting mung beans, if anybody out there knows what that is. So yeah, so we harvest. She was on one side of the sack, and I was on the other side during a CSP project. And at that point, I was like, "Oh yeah, she's kind of interesting. Maybe I'll get to know her later on." She transferred out, but then after my mission, I was so homesick for the Philippines that I went back and without plan or anything. And I wanted to go see Mindanao, but I was a little worried about going down there. So I looked up former missionaries that lived there.
Mm-hmm.
And she happened to be one of them. So from that point on, it just the rest is history, as they
Yeah,
say.
yeah, as they say. And another question, this whatever. The growth of the church in the Philippines is huge, is massive. But I
Yeah.
don't feel like it gets the attention that Africa gets, that South America gets? Why is Salt Lake City and the culture of the church, in the United States so different from the Philippines that we just can't grasp it? Is there not great PR messages coming from the Philippines specifically? Why don't we know more about that arm of the church?
It's always kind of surprised me because you're right. I mean, the growth has been absolutely explosive. When I was serving in the Philippines in the late 90s, there was one temple in Manila.
Mm-hmm.
I believe there was 14 missions. I can't even venture a guess now. I want to say 4 or 5 temples, and I don't even know how many missions. So my old Baguio mission is now like 5 missions. And I think that the reason for that is most of the things that we hear about Filipinos is in the diaspora. And they have one of the largest diasporas in the world. So Filipinos live in absolutely every corner of this planet. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the culture is now diaspora culture. The way the gospel works over there in practice is quite different than here. They have a much more relaxed approach to almost everything: time, culture, everything, but such an intense devotion to what I would call the weightier matters. Sure. And so what I would claim is actual Christianity. I've never seen a more fierce devotion to mercy, to kindness, to love, to all these other things. Whereas if you've ever been to a part of the world like, yeah, church attendance is, if it starts at 10, show up at 10:15. Sure. We'll get going around whenever. Usually what would happen, at least during my mission, is you'd have sacrament, and then after sacrament, the whole ward would sort of trundle across the street to a store, and everybody would buy their Coke and crackers, and then everybody trundled back and maybe get a half hour gospel doctrine. And I, having come from the Intermountain West, I was like, I could learn to live like this.
Yes.
Like, absolutely. I could learn to live like this. But I will say the greatest love and acceptance unconditionally I have ever experienced in my life has been there. It touched me in ways that I can't even begin to describe. And to this day, those are the people I want to be. Mm-hmm. The people I know in the Philippines are the people that I want to be one day when I grow up, I guess.
Making you dial it back a little bit, though, you mentioned you couldn't be more Western Idaho. Dad's a beef, a beef farmer, right? A beef rancher. And you get called to this place, in your words, you look it up. You don't even know what it is, mm-hmm. where it is. What do they speak? I have no idea what it is that they speak. So often we talk about, missionary service and how it can change lives to the best of your ability. How would you say that this call to serve in this place that you had not ever heard of has changed your life?
I mean, I in some ways look at the beginning of my life at that point. I mean, I had a childhood, I had an adolescence. It was very scripted. It was very perfunctory, I guess, in some ways. Did all the things. I went to a little country high school of 36, so I guess it was unique in that way. But when I went over there, it sort of shattered all of my cozy notions about what the world is and what it isn't. Mm-hmm. And there was an adjustment period. I mean, it's certainly true of anybody who goes there where you're like, oh my gosh, this is what poverty looks like. Like bucket showers every day, dirt floors. My first area, there was no gas station, no bank, nothing. And there's that immediate adjustment. And it impacted me in a way. When I used to take students abroad, they would all experience the same thing, where you'd look at a lack of material possessions and you'd say to yourself, oh my gosh, like what does anybody around here look forward to? Most of the people that I knew on my mission would never fly on an airplane, would never eat in a fancy restaurant, would never stay at a nice hotel. And existentially, this bothers you for your first 6 weeks, right? Where you're like, okay, well, these are the things I look for. I want to get a job one day. I want to earn money. Why? So I can buy lots of crap, right? So I can stay at, whatever. And coming to terms with the hollowness of that is scary and then unbelievably liberating. I mean, it really is comparable, as I used to teach Asian history, it's almost comparable to like the realizations of the Buddha, where he has access to every possession and every pleasure. And one day he realizes that if this is all there is, then I have this existential angst that prompts me to denounce my birth, to leave my palace, to go out and search for something. And I was so lucky because, unlike the Buddha, I didn't have to go out and search. It came to me. Yeah. And I feel like I developed this sense of like, oh, what I look forward to is relationships and meaning and conversation and discovery and change. And I came back, and honestly, a lot of people were afraid, like, oh my gosh, what Mike's gone like off the deep end. He could shave his head, renounce his earthly possessions, and become a
Sure.
communist or something. And um, there's still a small part of me that is like that. Like I will admit, like most people, I do struggle with chasing money or going into Costco and seeing the abundance of clothing, and I'm like, I really need that jacket. And then you buy the jacket, and then 2 weeks later, you're like, why did I buy this jacket?
Right.
But it seemed like it would make me happy at the time. And I sometimes have to slap myself and remind myself, Mike, you were at your absolute happiest when you were sitting on a dirt floor with a candle and didn't have a thing that you owned, yet somewhere deep inside, profoundly, you were happy. And it's been a lifelong struggle to try to maintain that while also living here where I'm from, and it's just one of those things, I guess.
Yeah.
But I've my career has been based on that experience in the Philippines. My family obviously has been based on that. I feel like a lot of my philosophical views of meaning and purpose and all that still harken back to that.
When I think about like a younger person listening to this, or maybe the senior couple that's trying to decide whether or not a mission is a thing for them, and there's just so much that we don't know. I can remember before serving, I served in Cleveland. It's the Philippines of the United States, Cleveland.
I've been, yes.
Yeah, yeah. It's not at all. It's not at all that. But to your point, it is life changing in such a way that as you're trying to describe how life will change by doing it, and hear me very loudly, and I've said this many times before, I had never read the Book of Mormon before. I
Mm.
can remember the recognition of being like, wait a minute, this is a book about Christ visiting the Americas. Does everyone know this? And they're like, yeah, yeah, we read it before we came. And I'm like, no way, really? You like, I genuinely didn't know it. I just believed that this would be a thing that would be better for my life. And I know that some people will take issue with that, where they go, no, you should be going on a mission to, preach the gospel. And that's a huge part of it. But I think that if you can recognize and trust in God that like, this is for the betterment of your life,
Mm.
and maybe the only testimony that is changed or strengthened or whatever is your own, like it can be, as you indicate, life altering for your life entirely. Just to pick up a couple things that you said, there are 14 temples either planned or operating in the Philippines, 3 operating right now, 4 under construction, and then the other 7 in the planning or design phase. And with the recent announcement of the 55 new missions, there will be ultimately 31 by July of 2026 in the Philippines. So,
Mm. My gosh. If you would have
yeah,
told me that in 1999, I'd have called you a liar.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Let's take a break. I want to come back in the second block, and I want to get into this book that you have written. Now you get to write whatever you want, and you chose to write about this. We'll find out why coming back in the second block of the Cultural Hall.
Looking for a gift that's meaningful and unique? Discover the artistry of Latter Day 3D Studio, where we 3D print exquisitely detailed temple magnets, Christmas ornaments, temple ties, and more. Each item is meticulously crafted layer by layer to bring the spirit of the temple into your home. These creations make ideal gifts for baptisms, ordinations, or birthdays in primary, young women, or relief society. Visit LatterDay3DStudio.com and find the temple that inspires you. Latter Day 3D Studio, where faith meets craftsmanship.
Here in the second block of the Cultural Hall, remember that you can become a Patreon saint. You go to patreon.com/the Cultural Hall, where you can put your money where your ears are. Almost 1,000 episodes of the Cultural Hall, and time ain't free, and you listen for free. Why don't you take some of your hard-earned money and contribute it so that the Cultural Hall can continue things like live shows and better, faster internet websites, all the things. That's what the money goes towards. Doesn't go in my pocket. It goes to make the show better. Go to patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. Remember that if you become a Patreon saint, you get to be a part of the secret but not sacred Facebook group where all the Patreon saints are hanging out. So, my tendency, Mike, is I want to call you Dr. Mike, just because I think that's like, hey, Dr. Mike's your buddy, Dr. Mike's your friend.
Yeah.
I'll just call you Mike.
Oh,
Infinite Contingencies is the title of the book, and then like the subtitle, Insights on Latter-day Saint Doctrine and Practice. Now, here's the deal. Pretty broad. So as you said, hey, you know what, we should talk about this. I found it interesting as I did some more research. You essentially talk about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 5 or 6 points lined out as the problem of perfection, charity isn't fair, the transgression test, a theory of translation, and achievement as a spiritual practice. I would love to talk about one of those. Dealer's choice. Which one do you want to dive into?
we could do let's do the achievement of spiritual practice.
Okay. Now take me, and I understand this completely. You know, having read your book already 20 times, I get it. I get it. But for everyone who doesn't get it, let's go really basic and then take us into the depths of this. Achievement as spiritual practice.
Sure. So, really, the basis of the book, just to give the article a little bit of context, was what is in this are really two things. Number one, theological questions that I have personally struggled with, not in a, oh my gosh, it's destroying my testimony way, but just something where I'm like, how do we reconcile this, right? How do we approach this question?
Mm-hmm.
And also things I observe. So I was able to serve as a stake Sunday school president for a while and high council and had a lot of opportunity. And there are just things that I saw that I was like, you know what, this needs to be addressed. And one of the things I think is particularly pertinent is this article, Achievement is Spiritual Practice. Now, you and I are Gen Xers, I'm going to assume.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm a boomer, but I just have good skin. No, I'm a Gen X. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I remember as a youth, especially, that the church for me was very programmatic, right? So we had all kinds of programs that you would get into, and we would set goals and have metrics for measuring those goals. And then I, at least, and I think others as well, from what people tell me, really came to conflate the notion of my spiritual progress with goal achievement. And I feel like this translated into other things as well. And one of the things, as I've gotten a little bit older, is I felt like in my own life, it's a sort of, what have you done for me lately? I found it almost difficult to take joy in big achievements. I mean, I remember when I got my PhD, envisioning that moment, I was like, oh, I'm going to do a backflip.
Yeah.
And when it actually happened, I was like, okay, but now it's the book, right? Now it's the tenure track job. Now it's associate professor. Now it's full professor. And I found it very difficult in some ways to take joy in a lot of this. And I wondered, what is the root of this? Why am I unable? And I felt like the idea of constant, unrelenting progress as measured by goals and metrics. And what I explore in the article is, on the one hand, I say, look, this is great. I feel like there has been so much good done by youth programs and goal setting and metrics. But on the other hand, it can produce two potential issues. Number one is my issue, this idea of it's not achieving, it's what I'm achieving next, right? And if I'm not constantly engaged, anxiously engaged in a good cause.
Sure. I've heard that word before, that phrase before.
Yeah. Yep. I think it's in the,
yeah.
our books, I suppose. That all of a sudden I'm slipping back. I'm going backwards. The other thing is, okay, well, what about someone from our generation who didn't get their Eagle Scout, who didn't serve a mission, who didn't go to college, who didn't do these kinds of things? And I think this has been something in the culture that has definitely improved. But I certainly remember when I was young, parents actually telling their daughters, like, look, you don't want to marry somebody who didn't serve a mission. You don't want to marry somebody who didn't do these kinds of things. And the approach I take is kind of an interesting approach. So one of the reasons I became a professor, without shame, I'll admit, is because I love Indiana Jones. I think he's awesome. If I could pick a fictional character that I want to be, it's him.
Hold on. You know, you could have just bought like a fedora and a whip, and you could have gone about it that way. You could have at least looked like him. You didn't have to go the whole doctoral road to be Indiana Jones. There's a far quicker, cheaper way, but I appreciate the commitment for sure.
Yeah, well, of course, I've done both. I'm not going to confirm or deny. And a bullwhip, by the way.
Sure.
But it was pointed out to me much later in life, and this is a thing that a lot of people know, but in the first movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones is utterly irrelevant to the plot.
Hmm.
If he doesn't get funding from the museum, the Nazis still find the Ark, they still open the Ark, and they get melted.
Mm-hmm.
You could even make a case that Indiana Jones makes things worse because it was originally ordered to fly from Tanis to Berlin, where it was to be opened for Hitler and the high command.
Mm-hmm.
The world would have been a much better place had Hitler had his face melted,
Yeah.
along with the rest of his crew. And because Indiana Jones mucks about, that's not what happens. And it's opened on this obscure Greek island where only a small cadre of Nazis are actually killed. And yet it's funny, none of that occurs to us when we're watching the film. Mm-hmm. We're not like, okay, this is dumb. He's irrelevant. And kind of the point I make is that Indiana Jones, and this has been brought up by other philosophers, kind of embodies Aristotelian virtue ethics, right? And so this is
all right.
where
Hold on, because what you just said sounded like this to most of us.
For sure. Just to break it down a little bit. So there's a couple of different arguments on ethics, right? What is good? And so if we take a utilitarian or a consequentialist approach, what they would say is, well, it's the sum total of your actions. Like, is it net good? Right. So let's add up the columns.
Okay.
In the scriptures, actually, we can look at this in terms of Nephi killing Laban, wherein he and the Spirit make a very utilitarian argument where they say, okay, killing this guy is probably not the best thing, but the sum total of killing him exceeds the tragedy of killing him. Aristotle argued that virtue ethics was what really made a good life, right? So it's what kind of person you are rather than the sum total of your actions. And so the point I make in the article is that maybe what we should strive for is not the exact accomplishment of a goal, even though we can make a goal and we can measure it. Mm-hmm. So let's say I make a goal, I'm going to read my scriptures for 100 days in a row.
Right.
And after that 100 days, I fail 5 times. Well, for a lot of us, the tendency would be, shoot, I broke the record. I didn't do it. I failed in this regard. Oh my gosh. Or word of wisdom or whatever you want to do. My point should be, maybe we should adopt a hint from Indiana Jones and Aristotelian ethics and say, maybe it's not that I do 100 days straight, but am I the kind of person that feasts on the word of God? Maybe it's not, do I have to figure out exactly what the acceptable level of caffeine is in a Coke or an energy drink to perfectly observe the word of wisdom? Is it, I'm the kind of person that takes care of my body and regards it as something sacred and a gift. And I'm grateful for my health. And I think that if we adopt much more of an Aristotelian approach, these virtue ethics, am I the kind of person that fill in the blank? Then achievements naturally will accumulate.
Sure.
But not in a way that I'm going to script, because I'll admit, I spent much of my life like actually scripting. Okay, in football this year, I'm going to throw for 30 touchdowns. And this is the steps I got to do to make it happen. And then when it doesn't happen, I go back and look at my plan. And, my assumption is, well, what did I fail to do? How did I mess this up? And I think that's maladaptive. I don't think that that's a good approach. Yet I feel that our culture of eternal progress and temporal success and all these other things really trap us into a notion that achievement is a form of spiritual practice. And if I see someone that's successful and accomplishing their goals and doing all these things, then my assumption is, well, they must be righteous and on the ball and in tune with the Spirit. And I feel that in some ways we need to maybe rethink that within the culture.
Are there, my mind as you were talking went to, is this all to lay at the feet of Stephen R. Covey to say, listen, there were 7 habits, Stephen, and now you put us in a utilitarian projected, 40, 50 years of the church. And now this is why, where do you think it is? Where has it gone so askew? A particular example, like you were talking at the beginning, I think about like you get the duty to God, and then you get the Eagle Scout, and then you serve a mission, and then you get married, and there's all these kind of things that you sort of do. I feel like other cultures, other religions have similar things, but I don't know that similar like difficulty of linking, like just being a good person, being a Christian person exists within other denominations in the same way that it does within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I think that's undoubtedly true. And in the article, I do trace a little bit of the history of this. I do indulge myself a little bit with history, where the 19th century founding of the Restoration is firmly rooted within 19th century American culture. And the way that the gospel was rolled out was rolled out within this society and this culture. And we have to understand that at the beginning of the 19th century, we're really in the first industrial revolution, and it's altering the human experience in countless ways. The families are atomizing, households are becoming independent, people are more mobile, we have disposable income, we have the commodification of time and labor and all these other things. And so what's happening is there's a social gospel of wealth that really just 1 year after Joseph translates the Book of Mormon is articulated in Great Britain. And the idea is that wealth, industriousness, all these different things are a sign of righteousness. Mm-hmm. And I feel like even as we read through the Book of Mormon, there is this explicit mention that when the Nephites are righteous, they prosper. Sure. And it's very explicit in this prosperity, where they build buildings and they have commerce and they're developing agriculture. And then you juxtapose that with wicked societies, i.e. the Lamanites, who are idle and loathsome and don't even manufacture clothing. They run around in loincloths. Mm-hmm. And so the gospel of wealth, I feel like, at least our cultural interpretation of it, even in the scriptures, is prosperity and wealth equals righteousness, and poverty and sort of degradation equals wickedness. And I feel like, of course, our New England progenitors in the gospel, Brigham Young and the Pratts and Joseph, all these are in New England, where the Industrial Revolution is really getting traction. They're very naturally bringing these cultural elements into the early culture of the church. And we regard these men so highly, as we should, sure, but we regard them so highly that we assume when they say, like, be industrious, that's what God wants, mm-hmm, that they're making an eternal statement rather than a culturally embedded statement.
And it permeates. I mean, you think about like Deseret and Beehive and the industry of Utah, and then it just becomes generational. So how do we cut ourselves out of that? Going back to your very first experience where you're talking about in the Philippines, these are the happiest, and I would argue maybe most prosperous people who don't have buildings and farms, and they didn't go to Italy for their 1 year anniversary, or all this kind of stuff. How can we sort of course correct, and what can we bring within the walls of our churches, or within the the ward families that we've got, that can be able to go, hey, now, yeah, that's great, and there's a whole other part of prosperous that we can focus on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that the first step has to be that each one of us has to sit down and in maybe a very painful moment, self-reflexively ask, how am I judging my value morally, spiritually? Mm-hmm. What are the metrics that I'm using? So as I look around my world, am I judging it by the number of friends I have, how much my kids like me, what callings I hold, how successful I am? And that can often be a difficult process. It really can. But I think every member of the church should be doing that on a constant basis. The second thing is I feel like within the church, sometimes, and I write about this in another article, we use a shorthand for interpreting the scriptures. And I think that a lot of the social gospel of wealth is simply rehashed again and again because it's what we heard when we were kids. And this is, of course, an approved interpretation of Nephite society. And so when I prepare a lesson, I'm going to convey that message again. And then three, I know that this runs counter to people who do and don't have money, but if anybody has the chance, they should travel, and mm-hmm, they should experience life in places where it's simply not possible to judge my righteousness or the righteousness of my bishop or whatever else by any kind of material success, and see what that feels like. Who are you in that situation, and who are these people? And in my case, I found that they were the people I wanted to be more than who I was at that moment, and continue to be so. And I feel like that can somehow start to affect a culture change where we become much more concerned with, am I the kind of person that mm-hmm, feasts on the word of God, takes care of my body, is charitable to others, is forgiving, is all these kinds of things, as opposed to maybe a more discernible material or certificate, credential-based goal that I can make and then have a game plan to get it. Now, I'm not telling people to quit doing that.
No, sure.
Yeah.
But I think it's doing things on purpose or with a purpose that you can kind of have those two things run aside. The other thing that I kind of think about it as you were sharing that is, I think when we look at leadership of the church, it is someone with credential upon, they were the first and best this, they were the top of the shelf this, they left behind look at President Nilsson, look at President Oaks. These are the
Right.
top shelf. It's not, he was a guy who worked really hard at the corner market, really believed in God and was a Christian man, and now he's the prophet. And I'm not speaking ill of either way, but I think there is something very deeply rooted in even the leadership structure there, that sometimes it can be that those that are called and set up as examples are people who checked a box and had the thing and did the thing, and then there was the other thing, and they had the 7 habits, and then they read the secret 7-second habits and whatever the thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I sometimes wonder if it's not only that plus our tendency to identify that with righteousness. So again, I often hear members, when they tell non-members about President Nelson, will lead with the fact that he was a famous heart surgeon. Mm-hmm. Or when they tell people about President Oaks, they lead with the fact that he was a state Supreme Court justice. Mm-hmm. And I think the assumption on the part of them, and God bless them in their efforts, they're trying to share the gospel, but I think the is like, here, this guy was a heart. Now you can respect what he says next.
Yeah, interesting.
Which is love your neighbor and follow Jesus. And to me, that's a little bit out of order. Mm-hmm. As opposed to, oh my gosh, this man is the living embodiment of the Christian life and loves people. And by the way, he was a heart surgeon, know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It also interesting, talking about the utilitarian and the Aristotelian, if that's the way you would even say that. It's so funny. My wife, I've shared this before, not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So we get the experience of like, well, why are you doing that? When there's different things that come up in religious observance. And you couldn't have walked out exactly the conversations that we have in our home better with the 2 different examples. I'm like, you do it because you do it. And then you do the next thing. And she's like, yeah, but like, maybe like just be a good person because that's what's important. I'm like, yeah, sure, fine. It's important, but also you got to check the box. So that has been a walked out example of exactly how that feels.
100%. And I sometimes wonder if those things aren't proof to ourselves. Like, it was so funny. A couple of years ago, I took students abroad and we went to this amazing spot. And this girl was sitting in the jeepney and she didn't want to get out and look at it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Like, are you sick? Are you homesick? Did somebody do something? What's going on? And she goes, I forgot my phone. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, you're going to be okay without it. Like, let's go ahead. And she's like, no, and basically what it got down to is she's like, if I don't post a picture of this, did it even happen? Did I even go? And I feel like sometimes with us, if I am charitable and loving and kind and all these other things, but if I don't have some credential to demonstrate that, am I really right? Am I really charitable? Am I really kind? If my little kind acts are now like evaporated into the ether and I don't have anything hard to show for it, am I really righteous? And I feel like that contentment with, okay, I'm just a good person. And that's all I need. I don't need recognition. I don't need a credential that says I'm a good person. It's just who I am.
I want to take a quick break. I want to talk about who you feel like this book is really for. And then there are 3 questions we ask everyone who steps into the Cultural Hall. I'll ask those of you. Also, the Amazon guy is at your house, or the UPS guy or someone. That dog is so ready to get him. We'll take a break. We'll come back in the 3rd block. Let me take just a moment to tell you all about bestdjinutah.com. That is the website where you can learn all about me. Oh, sure, you probably feel like you know me, but you know me in the Cultural Hall sense. I have a DJ company, now 6 of us strong, great event hosts, MCs, and DJs that can be able to make whatever event you have coming up absolutely spectacular, and hope you will reach out to us. Now you're thinking, well, wait a minute, Richie, I don't live in Utah. Would you travel? Absolutely, I would travel. Would they travel? Absolutely, they would travel. Whatever your event is, doesn't have to be a wedding or a community event. We can do all sorts of things. I can teach you line dancing. I can dance with you. We can do partner dancing. We can do all kinds of things, but we can't do any of it if you don't hit me up. You can go to bestdjinutah.com. You can fill out the form to get more information or get a quote, and then I will get right back to you. Find out why I'm so busy and why sometimes we don't get episodes of the Cultural Hall. It's all because of bestdjinutah.com. Here in the 3rd block of the Cultural Hall, remember, if you're where you get the Cultural Hall allows you to review, take a moment, and whether you're reviewing this episode or the show in general, would love for you to take a moment and do that. I know particularly Apple Podcasts and then also on Spotify. You can leave reviews. You can leave comments on episodes. Encourage you to do that. We love that. And then as always, you can reach out, contact@theculturalhall.com. Would love to hear from you about this or other episodes that we could do or have done. Contact@theculturalhall.com. Dr. Mike, because I insist on making that happen. This book is for who? You wanted to see if you could write it. This is for your kids. It's a love letter on the difficult things of life for people like yourself out there struggling to find the way. Who is this for?
I would say that it's really for two types of people. Number one, it is for any member of the church who has ever had to struggle with some of the classic philosophical questions. So I mean, going all the way back. So in this book, I address things like, okay, the old Maimonides question. So is a thing good because God says it's good, or is it good because good preceded God? I mean, these kinds of things. So a lot of classic philosophical questions and a lot of things in practice and in the scriptures that people have probably run across that aren't devastatingly troublesome, but troublesome. And so I would say primarily for members of the church. I think most people will be able to relate to it that are probably 15 years old on. And what I tried to do is a couple of things. When I wrote the articles and the chapters, I wanted to make a discernible point. One of my issues, I guess I'll say, with some LDS literature is it doesn't offer anything contestable. It's sort of a reaffirmation of my faith. And so if I read the book, I'm like, yeah, okay, well, I agreed with everything in that book. It was just a reiteration of things I already believe.
Sure.
In this book, every chapter makes a discernible argument that can be engaged with. And I also offer some sort of resolution to it. So the other thing I didn't want to do in this book is just, okay, let me raise a bunch of critical questions and then throw it out to the people without any discernible answers. So every article makes an argument and then it offers a viable resolution to that argument, but in a way that people, I feel, can engage with it. So I think the best way to use this book is to read it with others, and then have a discussion after every time. And look, I'm an academic. I got, in terms of criticism, dead inside a long time ago. Like, peer review is the cruelest thing you will ever endure. And so I write it with the hope that some people will read it and go, oh my gosh, Mike, absolutely, that's correct. Like, achievement of spiritual practice is something we should be addressing. I'm sincerely hoping that there are another 5 million people out there that go, no, Mike, these programs were the best thing that ever happened to me. I adamantly disagree with you, and here's why. And to me, that kind of discussion is absolutely catnip. I love it to death. And so my hope is to really foster that kind of robust discussion where people can look at it and they can take opposite sides and they can have it out. And then the final thing I wanted to do here is, despite my attacking some misconceptions, I feel like, or things that need to be addressed, I was very, very careful in the book that nothing ever tears down a testimony.
Okay.
So there's absolutely nothing in this book that someone would read and then walk away and go, oh gosh, I never thought about it like that. Oh, maybe this isn't true. Or maybe, oh gosh, maybe they've been lying to me. There is nothing in this book like that. It is all faith affirming. It's all rooted within the canon. So I don't go far out. I don't even really, I try to avoid going super far out, even in like Journal of Discourses and like, let me mine this obscure quote from 1857. So I tried to keep it very mainstream that way. And so I hope people are provoked. I hope that they're engaged, inspired. I hope that a lot of their faith is affirmed in the book. And so I try to do all of these things through this series of 14 chapters.
He wants you to either love it or hate it. Don't just like it.
That's right.
If you just like it, meh, he's failed. Hate it or love it. That's what I hear as far as that goes. But to push on that a little bit, or maybe to draw on your wisdom a little bit, there are some things, I mean, you talk about how each chapter offers a resolution. There are things likely that you have, and I always like the term wrestled with, that there isn't a resolution, or that you're still waiting to gain greater perspective, or you just, like, what the church does or what has happened or whatever the thing may be, and there's just not that peace, there's not that resolution to it yet. To the people that that find themselves within that situation, I think you're keenly skilled to be able to speak to those that are kind of trying to have their way through it. And what is it? Is it this or that, or yes or no, or good or bad? Speak some wisdom to those people that are trying to find their way through maybe one of the things in the book, or maybe just something that they haven't been able to resolve yet.
My advice would honestly be to engage it. I found out long ago that intellectual fear is a cancer. That if there's something that you're struggling with, if there's a question and you're going to decide to run from it, I write this a little bit, but I have encountered people where a subject is broached and they're like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to hear anything about that. That's none of my concern. And I always think to myself, like, granted, on some obscure way out, obviously, yeah, we're not going to sit around and speculate, in medieval ways about how many angels dance on a head of a pin. But there are certain central theological issues we have to address. I mean, for me, it was honestly the title article of the book, Infinite Contingencies. My entire life, I have struggled with the basic theological question that if God is omniscient and God knows the future, how is my life not determined? He already saw it. And my entire life, I've really struggled with this. And at various times in my life, I have run from it. And I've said, no, agency is the rule of the gospel. And that's fine. And I'm not going to worry about this. But that didn't help. Eventually, I had to engage this and I had to address it and I had to research it. And I had to come up with what I feel is a viable idea rooted in the scriptures that answers the question. And I feel like in the book, Infinite Contingencies, the chapter, is my attempt to do that. Now, is it the definitive word? Do I actually know? No. But I feel like it is rooted enough in theology and the scriptures and the words of the prophet that I have offered my best effort, my best offering to myself and to the Lord on how to resolve this. And then the wonderful thing about being a member of the church is if I put forth my best effort and I really make an offering, then I would hope that the Spirit would pick up the rest and would guide me along that path. I don't think that the Lord or the Spirit or whatever is under any obligation to give me knowledge if I'm like, no, I'm going to run from this question. I'm going to close my eyes and plug my ears and never address it. Well, then how could we ever expect any kind of revelation on any particular question? And so I would encourage those that are struggling, engage it honestly. Look at it. Ask yourself, why am I concerned with this? Do I really want to know the answer to this? And if so, why? What is disturbing it? And then set about trying to find it. Make an offering. And I think more times than not, you will find some measure of resolution with the knowledge that, people have been struggling with these questions since the beginning of time. Mm-hmm. Some answers are better than others.
Restated, would you say that the Spirit then becomes the kind of the North Star? I think the fear that comes about, let's walk out the priesthood ban, right? A century and a half of the priesthood ban, and people have difficulty, struggles with that, and they go, oh man, if I research into this, I'm going to find something, and then I'm not going to be able to be a member of the church anymore, or like these sort of large scenarios. Like, what do you think is that kind of grounding point, that North Star, to allow people to step in that? Because I think that people aren't just like, well, I don't want to know because I don't want to know. I think they're afraid of what, knowing or finding out or learning more means or could mean to them. So how can they safely do that? What is that grounding point?
I would say before they even engage the question that is so terrifying to them, maybe begin with questioning some of why do I find this terrifying? Okay. And I feel like the ban on the priesthood is such a perfect example because, let's say I find out that Brigham Young held racial bias and maybe took church policy in a way that was not the right way. I mean, I think there's evidence for that because Joseph, of course, was fine with people of African descent. Then all of a sudden, if I know that, what's the matter? Maybe I'm terrified of it because our brethren, I elevate to the status of infallibility, which they never proclaimed to be.
Sure.
And every person that's ever lived has said, or every person that's ever been in church leadership said, look, I'm just a person. I'm doing the best I can. And I'm trying to manage this thing in a temporal world, in a temporal body with imperfect knowledge. And yet in the church, we want to set these as lodestones. And we're like, oh no, if Brigham Young was wrong, then maybe Kimball was wrong. And then maybe Hunter was wrong. And and then you just want to pull that thread. Under that circumstance, facing up to what actually scares you about it, maybe you should recalibrate what you think, what a proper expectation of church leaders should be. They're men under the dictates of the Lord doing the best they can. And I feel like the progress of the church is evidence that more times than not, they're right. but they have been wrong on things. And they admit it. Bruce R. McConkie admitted it about that very policy.
Yeah.
And are you okay with that? Or is your expectation for your religion absolute infallibility and perfection? If it is, you're in for some serious disappointment.
Yeah. I love it. 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 Before our time expires together, there are 3 questions that we ask everyone who steps into the cultural hall. I want to ask them of you right now. First question is Dr. Michael Hawkins, do you have a calling? And if so, what is it?
I'm currently the Sunday school secretary.
Okay. So like you're making attendance happen. Is that what does the Sunday school
Yeah.
secretary do?
Yeah, basically that.
Yeah.
Do that. We do teacher in service, so education, how to teach, kind of seminars, make sure the classes are covered, those kind of things. Yep.
Okay. If you could pick a calling, either one that exists or make one up, what would you pick?
Oh, hands down, gospel doctrine.
Okay. Well,
yeah,
then
my happiest callings have been that. Yeah.
I'm going to have to push then, because you get 4 options: Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price, Old Testament, New Testament. You get to teach 1 year, and then you don't ever get to be a gospel doctrine teacher ever again. What year are you teaching?
Oh, easy. New Testament.
Okay. The final question we ask everyone is, what is your favorite part of your faith?
Oh, good question. I think my favorite part of the faith, this won't come as a surprise, but is the idea that we're never going to run out of knowledge. We're never going to run out. There is always going to be something else. Neil A. Maxwell once said, there are more good answers than we have good questions. And I have always been inspired by that, thinking like, there is so much to comprehend. There is so much beauty and so much complexity and so much theology that we don't even know how to ask the proper question to arrive at the answer. And I feel like, in my experience, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has a better epistemology or theory of knowledge and a better approach to knowledge than anything else. And I've spent a great deal of time in Buddhist countries and enjoy the esoteric musings of the cosmos, and spent time, as I write in my book, among a lot of Islamic communities. And I love the interrogation of the text and all that. But our approach to knowledge is something rare and special. And it's just so beautiful the way that's instilled in primary kids and adolescents and adults, and Come Follow Me and personal study, and just the amazing app, the compendium of knowledge that we have in that one app absolutely staggers me. It's such an amazing thing that we have.
Do you find sometimes, I think within the one true and living church, we set ourselves up where we are no longer curious about other faiths and traditions? Do you think we do ourselves a disservice by having sort of that hubris of, we've got the one truth, almost like people can learn from us, but we can't learn from other people? And if so, how do we break that down so that we can gain, this greater knowledge, this from these millions and billions of other people who are also learning about a deity, about peace, about being good people, that we just aren't doing presently?
Yeah, I think you could not have said anything more true than that. I have found that some of my greatest insights about our faith have come from association with and study of other faiths. I mean, I'll give you just a really quick example. When I was on my Fulbright, my son and I would go to daily prayers in the mosque when we were down in the autonomous region. And after prayers, it's wonderful in a mosque because the imam will come, everybody sits on the floor, and they just have these theological conversations. No holds bars, like being in a synagogue, if you've ever been in a synagogue. And the Muslims were like world-class fellowshippers, where they would say, okay, today's the day you're going to convert, like pronounce the shahada and let's get on with this. And so we talk about it, and they would often interrogate me like, okay, why are you a Christian? And there was 2 issues we'd come back to. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'd never thought about it like that, where they would say, on the one hand, explain to me this whole concept of a savior. Like this does not make sense to us in the least. Allah is all powerful. Allah knows your heart. If you are sorry for what you've done and you ask forgiveness, Allah will forgive you. What is all this talk about intercession and a savior and paying a debt? And this makes no sense to us. And within that context, I really had to think deeply about why we have a savior, why a cosmic debt has to be paid, and the limits of omnipotence, the ability to forgive and all of these things. And then this is kind of funny, but it doesn't sound this way when I say it. But the other thing they would ask me constantly is, okay, the other thing you got to explain to me is, why do you ritualistically cannibalize your God once a week? And at first when they said, I was like, what do you mean? We don't do that. And they're like, I think you do.
Yeah.
You take the flesh and blood of your savior and God and you eat it. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'd never thought about that. So I did a great deal of research on it, and just like, oh my gosh, why do we do this? And so the things we take for granted, like obviously it's Christianity, I wish it was as obvious to the rest of the world, is not. And seeing ourselves through another's eyes in terms of theology and cosmology and practice and ritual, it really causes us to think and appreciate and draw from other. I've drawn so much insight from Buddhism and Hinduism, especially reading early Hindu texts like the Vedas and the Upanishads, and of course my time among Muslims. And I'm so much the richer for it, I think, in terms of just understanding what my theology is.
Well, our time has expired. People can pick up this book. I know that as we record it, it is not technically out yet, but by the time that people will be hearing this, out and available for people to be able to purchase. I found that I could get it at Target and Barnes & Noble, so it is literally everywhere you would want to get a book. It's called Infinite Contingencies, Insights on Latter-day Saint Doctrine and Practice. The author, Dr. Michael Hawkins, and there is a link for it in the show notes if you want to pick it up, and encourage you to do so. Appreciate our time together very much. Hope that this episode has nourished and strengthened your body, that if you weren't healthy enough to listen this week, that you'll be healthy enough to listen next week, and that when the time comes, you will be able to travel home in safety. In the meantime, go Tar Heels! Chris at Alpine Lakes Travel, Debbie Wanless, Chocolate Cake Bites Podcast, and the Tiger with a U will be saving a seat for you on the back row of the Cultural Hall.
Save me a seat, it's sure to be neat on the back row. We really gotta go on the Cultural Hall show.